The morning it happened, Ada Marin was transcribing a salvage dispute. She was 23 years old and 4 months into her posting, and her job was the least glamorous job in the Terran Commonwealth's fleet judiciary. She was a junior recorder. She did not argue, she did not rule, she did not advise. She sat in a narrow booth on the third deck of the records annex at Callisto Station with a stylus in her hand and a live feed in her ear, and she wrote down what was said, exactly as it was said, including the pauses, including the coughs, including the moment a nervous witness said the wrong name and corrected himself. The machines did it too, of course. The machines did it faster. But the judiciary had held for 200 years that a record kept only by machines was a record no human had promised was true, and so every proceeding had a recorder, and the recorder signed the transcript with her own name, and if the transcript was wrong, it was her name that was wrong with it. Ada liked the work more than she admitted at parties. There was a cleanness to it. The world came apart into words, and the words went into the ledger, and the ledger did not care who was rich or who was shouting. Her father had been a fisherman before he drowned. Her mother was a teacher. Neither of them had ever had a document that mattered. Ada found she liked being the person who made documents that did. The salvage dispute concerned a wrecked ore tender and 2 insurers, and it was so dull that the presiding officer had twice asked counsel to speak up. Ada was writing the phrase. The tow line parted at approximately 0400 when the feed in her ear stopped. It did not fade. It stopped, the way a heart stops, and then a different voice came in, flat and administrative, the voice of Callisto Station traffic saying that all judiciary channels were being preempted by a conquered priority relay. Ada blinked at her half-finished line. She had never heard of a conquered priority relay preempting a salvage hearing. She had never heard of a conquered priority relay at all. Then the wall of her booth turned into the Ossaran Imperium's court of the Radiant Throne, and Ada Marin watched the beginning of the worst 6 days in the history of her species. Ossarai were an old people. That was the first thing anyone said about them, and they said it the way you'd say a mountain was tall. 22,000 years of continuous record, 900 worlds, a civilization so vast and so slow that it had absorbed 3 other civilizations without particularly noticing, the way a river absorbs a stream. They were tall and gray-skinned and moved with a terrible, unhurried grace, and they had a law for everything. That was the second thing anyone said about them. The Ossarai loved law the way some peoples love music. They had statutes older than human agriculture. They had a courthouse on their capital world with 40 million cases carved into its walls, and guides who would walk you along the walls for a year and not reach the end. Humanity had been in the conquered of worlds for 61 years. Humanity was, in the ledgers of the galaxy, a rounding error with opinions. And Hesperine was a colony of 10 million people on an ocean world at the far edge of the Vail Reach, and it had been settled for 140 years, and Ada Marin had been born there. She watched the feed and did not understand at first what she was seeing. There was a chamber the size of a city square. There were tiers of gray figures in white. There was a raised bench of black stone and a seated figure on it, and above the figure a disk of hammered gold that Ada knew from a single seminar was the sigil of the Radiant Throne. And on the floor of the chamber, alone, in a circle of light, there was an empty chair. The empty chair was for the accused. The accused was Hesperine. Not a person from Hesperine. Not a governor, not a magistrate, not a smuggler. The colony. 10 million people, charged in one instrument as a single defendant, under an Ossaran statute 11,000 years old, with the crime of contumacious occupation of Imperial soil. Ada heard herself say, "That's not a thing." Nobody answered. The booth was soundproofed. She was alone in it, and the room outside was filling with people, and she could see them through the glass, standing, watching their own walls, not moving. The charge was read for 2 hours. Ada listened to all of it, because listening was what she did, and because her hands had gone numb and would not obey her anyway. The Imperium's advocate laid it out with total, unhurried courtesy. In the year that the humans reckoned as 1846, an Ossaran survey ship had passed through the Vail Reach and had inscribed a claim upon a blue world it named Vail. The claim had been filed. The claim had been indexed. The claim had never been abandoned, because the Imperium did not abandon claims. It merely allowed them to rest. 99 years ago, humans had landed on that world without leave and had begun to build. They had built atolls of poured stone and had grown weed forests in the shallows, and had raised generations of children on soil that was, in law, the soil of the Radiant Throne. The Imperium, the advocate said, does not begrudge the industry. The Imperium notes the industry. The Imperium observes only that industry upon another's ground creates no right, and that a wrong which endures for a century is not thereby cured. It is merely a wrong of long standing. The Commonwealth's answer when in an hour later, Ada watched that too. The Commonwealth's advocate was a small furious woman named Petra Oyalaran, and she made every argument there was to make. That the claim had never been perfected by settlement, that 99 years of open possession created title under conquered law, that a colony was not a legal person and could not be a defendant, that 10 million individuals could not be tried in the absence of 10 million individuals, that no court in the galaxy had jurisdiction over a Commonwealth world, that the proceeding was a nullity, and the Commonwealth would not dignify it. The court of the Radiant Throne heard her with perfect politeness, and ruled that her appearance had waived the objection to jurisdiction. That was the moment Ada understood. She was a recorder. She knew what a real proceeding looked like from the inside, the way a sailor knows weather. A real proceeding was a machine for finding out what happened. This was a machine for having already decided. Every rule was observed. Every form was met. The advocates were learned, the citations were correct, the transcript would be immaculate, and the whole apparatus was pointed from the first second at one place. She left the booth. Chief Recorder Emil Vondra was standing in the corridor with his glasses in his hand, and he had been Chief Recorder for 30 years, and he looked at her with an expression she never afterward forgot. "Sir," she said, "my family's there." "I know," Vondra said. "Sit down, Marin." "They can't do this." "Sit down." She did not sit down for 6 days. Nobody on Callisto Station really did. The Ossaran court sat continuously, in shifts, the way their courts had sat for 11,000 years, and the feed ran continuously, and the Conquered of Worlds convened its standing assembly to consider the matter, and then spent 4 of the 6 days considering whether it had convened properly. Ada learned the shape of that too. The Conquered had 216 member polities. 90 of them held Ossaran trade licenses. 40 more sat inside the Imperium shipping lanes and had no navy worth the word. The Assembly passed a resolution of concern. It passed an amendment to the resolution of concern. It referred the resolution of concern to a committee, which asked the Imperium, courteously, for clarification, and the Imperium answered courteously that this was an internal matter of Imperial property law, and that the Conquered's own charter forbade interference in the domestic legal proceedings of a member state. And the thing was, the charter did say that. Ada looked it up herself at 3 in the morning with her eyes burning. Article 9. She read it 4 times. It said exactly what they said it said. That was the trick. That was the whole trick, and it was beautiful in the way a knife is beautiful. They had not attacked Hesperine. They had sued it. On the 4th day, the Imperium moved for judgment. On the 5th day, the court of the Radiant Throne granted it. The finding ran to 900 pages, and Ada read it, all of it, because she could not stop reading it. And it was scrupulous, and it was learned, and it was, in every particular, a lie told with true sentences. Hesperine was in contumacious occupation. Hesperine had been noticed and had not vacated. Hesperine had, by its persistence, become not a trespass but a defiance, and defiance of the Radiant Throne was, under the 11th book, the one crime the Imperium did not measure in degrees. On the 6th day, the court passed sentence. There is a version of this story where somebody describes what the sentence said. Ada Marin spent the rest of her life declining to be that somebody. The words are in the record. They are in 9 languages, in the permanent archive of the Conquered of Worlds, and anybody may read them. And Ada's own certified transcript is the copy the galaxy uses, because she made it, because she sat there with her stylus and wrote every word down as it was said, and she signed her name to it at the bottom, and her name is the reason that document is trusted in every court in known space. She wrote it down so that it would never have to be spoken aloud again. What she said afterward when they asked her was this. She said, "The sentence was carried out by the Ninth Punitive Armada of the Imperial Fleet, under Grand Marshal Rithai's call, beginning at 11:40 in the morning local. The feed ran for 9 hours and 40 minutes. It ran on the open Conquered relay, unencrypted on every channel to every world. That was not an accident. That was the point. The Imperium did not do this in the dark. The Imperium did this in front of the galaxy so that the galaxy would learn something. 10 million people. I am not going to describe it, and I would ask you not to run the footage behind my testimony. Show the sea. The sea is enough." She was right, the sea was enough. Hesperine was a water world. There was no land on it above the size of a barn. The whole planet was one green-blue ocean 9 kilometers deep, with a thin chain of volcanic shoals along its equator like stitches on a wound. The colonists had built on the shoals. They had poured stone atolls and grown them outward year by year, and they had named them the way sailors name things, plainly and with love. Kel Atoll, Faro Deep, Windward 9, Mercy Shoal, Long Reach, Tuesday. There had been a town called Tuesday, with 9,000 people in it, because the founding party had made landfall on a Tuesday and had been too tired to think of anything better, and had then discovered that they liked it. The people of Hesperine were fishers and weed farmers and stone growers, and latterly biochemists, because the deep water turned out to be full of things worth a great deal to people with laboratories. They were not rich. They were not strategic. They had a militia with 9 armed cutters, which they used mostly to pull idiots off reefs. They had a saying, which Ada's mother had said to her about 4,000 times. The sea does not hate you, it just doesn't know you're there. Ada's mother was Talia Marin, 41, a teacher at the district school on Kel Atoll. Ada's father had been Reuben Marin, and he had gone over the side of a tender in a squall when Ada was 11, and after that her mother had raised 2 children on a teacher's stipend and an unreasonable quantity of stubbornness. Ada's brother was Jonah Marin, 19, an apprentice at the waterworks, who was funny and lazy, and had wanted to be a pilot until he learned how much the schooling cost, and had decided, with enormous dignity, that he had always preferred pumps. Ada had left at 17 on a judiciary scholarship, on a transport out of Long Reach, and her mother had stood on the quay in the rain and had not cried, because she had a rule about that, and Jonah had cried enough for both of them and had then pretended he hadn't. That was the last time Ada saw them. She had talked to them 11 days before the court of the Radiant Throne convened. Her mother had complained about the new curriculum. Jonah had told a long story about a pump. After the 9th hour and the 40th minute, the feed cut to an orbital view, and Hesperine was there, blue and white and turning, exactly as it had always been. That was the thing nobody was ready for. It looked fine. The clouds were in their usual streaks. The sun came up over the equatorial shoals the way it had come up every 11 hours for 4 billion years. From 400 kilometers you could see the atolls as pale marks on the green, and you could not see anything else at all, because there was nothing else to see. And then the feed ended, and the wall of Ada Marin's booth went back to being a wall, and somewhere far off in the record's annex, a man began to scream, and it went on for a while. Ada did not scream. She looked at the wall, then she looked at her hands, Then she looked at the transcript on her desk, which said, in her own careful hand, the tow line parted at approximately 0400, and she thought with perfect clarity that she was going to have to finish that. Somebody had to finish it. It was a real dispute between real people, and it did not stop being real because the world had ended. That was the first thing she understood, sitting in the booth. The second thing took longer. Emil Vondra found her there 11 hours later. She had not moved. There was a cold cup of something at her elbow that somebody had put there and she had not touched. He sat down across from her, heavily, an old man with a bad hip and a voice like gravel in a bucket. And he did not tell her he was sorry, which she was grateful for, because 40 people had told her they were sorry and she had wanted to hit every one of them. They're saying we'll do nothing, he said instead. In the mess, that's what they're saying, Concord's tied, 900 worlds against 61. They're saying we'll file a protest and take reparations, and in 30 years there'll be a plaque. Ada said nothing. And the other half, Vondra said, are saying the opposite. There's a man on series this morning with 200,000 people listening to him, and what he's saying is 10 million for 10 million. He's saying find an Ossaran world of the right size and settle the account. He's saying it's arithmetic. He rubbed his eyes. He's got a petition. It's got 11 million signatures on it. It had 9 million an hour ago. Ada looked up. What do you think? Vondra said. She thought about it. She was 23 years old and her mother was dead and her brother was dead, and the town called Tuesday was gone because a founding party had been tired, and she found that she had an answer, and that the answer had been sitting in her the whole 11 hours, waiting, like something at the bottom of deep water. I think they held a trial, Ada said. Vondra frowned. What? They held a trial. Her voice was strange to her, flat and very steady. They didn't have to. They've got 900 worlds and we've got 61. They could have just come. Nobody could have stopped them. Nobody would have done anything. But they held a trial and they broadcast it, and they made sure every rule was kept. And do you know why? Tell me. Because they wanted it to be lawful. Ada put both hands flat on the desk. That's what the 6 days were for, not for us, for them. So that afterwards every Ossaran who watched it could say, well, it was terrible, but it was the law and I didn't do it, the court did it, and the court didn't do it, the statute did it, and the statute's 11,000 years old and nobody alive wrote it. That's what a sham trial is for, sir. It's not for the dead. It's a machine for making sure that when it's over, nobody is responsible. 10 million people and not one guilty man. That's the product. That's what they built. Vondra was very still. So if we burn a world, Ada said, they win. Not the fight. The argument. Because then it's 2 atrocities and a long history, and in 1,000 years it's a war nobody started, and Hesperine is a chapter, and my mother is a footnote in a chapter. And there is still, at the end of all of it, not one guilty man. She looked at the wall, where the court of the radiant throne had been. I don't want a world, she said. I want the names. I want the name of the officer who gave the order and the name of the officer who took it and the name of the officer who could have said no and didn't. And I want them in a ledger, and I want them signed. They spent 6 days proving that 10 million people were guilty of being alive. Fine. Let's find out who's actually guilty of anything. Let's do it properly. Let's take as long as it takes. Emil Vondra looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up and picked up her half-finished salvage transcript and set it back down in front of her, squared to the edge of the desk. Finish that, he said. Then come to my office. There are people you need to meet. The people in Emil Vondra's office were not what Ada expected. She had expected admirals. There was one admiral, and she was sitting in the corner with her boots off, eating a sandwich, and she did not look up when Ada came in. The rest of them were lawyers and one archivist, and a woman of about 70 in a plain gray coat who was standing at the window looking at Jupiter with her hands behind her back. The woman in gray turned around. You're Marin. Yes, ma'am. I'm Halima Osai. She said it as though it were a fact of no importance, which was how Ada learned that the presiding justice of the Commonwealth's Court of Fleet Inquiry did not introduce herself with her title. Vandra tells me you said something last night that he thinks I should hear. Say it again. Ada said it again. It came out worse the second time, less clean, more raw, and halfway through her voice cracked, and she stopped and started over and finished it anyway. When she was done, the room was quiet. The admiral in the corner had put her sandwich down. Justice Osai said, "Do you know how many people have told me in the last 30 hours that we must be proportionate?" "No, ma'am." "All of them, every single one." "And do you know what they mean by it?" Osai's mouth did something that was not a smile. "They mean nothing. It's a word people say when they want to sound grave while they decide to do nothing at all. Proportionate. 10 million people, so what's proportionate? 5 million, 9. Do you know what the proportionate response to Hesperine is, Recorder Marin? There isn't one. There is no act in this universe proportionate to Hesperine. So we can stop pretending that arithmetic is a moral principle. Because the man on Ceres with his 11 million signatures is doing arithmetic. And so is every coward in the conquered assembly. And they are doing the same sum and getting opposite answers, and neither answer has anything to do with justice. She came away from the window and sat down on the edge of Vandra's desk, which no one had ever done in Ada's presence. "You said something different," Osa said. "You said you wanted names. Tell me why that isn't just revenge with better manners." Ada's throat was dry. "Because revenge doesn't care who," she said. "That's the whole definition. Revenge is a quantity. You take 10 million and you give back 10 million, and it doesn't matter who's 10 million because the point was never the people, the point was the number. That's what they did to us. They didn't hate my mother. They'd never heard of my mother. She was a quantity." She swallowed. "If I want a specific man and I want him for a specific act and I can prove it and I'd let him go if I couldn't prove it, then it isn't revenge. It's the other thing. It's the only other thing there is." The admiral in the corner spoke for the first time. She had a low, unbothered voice. "You'd let him go." Ada turned. "If we couldn't prove it." "Yes, ma'am." "Say that in front of the assembly and they'll tear you apart." "Then I'd be right in front of the assembly." The admiral looked at her for a moment, then she picked up her sandwich again. "Halima," she said, "I like this one." "Everybody likes her, Teodora. That's not a legal argument." Osai stood. "Recorder Marin, this is Admiral Teodora Reisquan, who commands the Fifth Fleet and who has, in the last day, been asked 11 times to prepare a plan to reduce an Ossaran core world, and who has 11 times declined in language I am not permitted to enter in a record. That is Advocate General Kashinrup, who will have to make whatever we build stand up. The rest of them you'll meet. We have about 40 hours before the assembly votes, and if the vote goes the way it is currently going, the Commonwealth will accept an indemnity of 900 billion credits and a formal expression of regret, and that will be the end of Hesperine forever. Ada felt something cold move through her. They'd take money. They would take money, Osai said, because the alternative that anyone has put on the table so far is a war of extermination, and the assembly is not composed of monsters. It is composed of frightened people who have been offered exactly 2 doors. Our job in the next 40 hours is to build a 3rd door. She looked at Ada. You're going to help, not because you're clever, though you may be. Because you are the only person in this building who was born there, and because when you say the word Hesperine you are not saying a policy. Get your coat. The debate in the Commonwealth Assembly ran for 19 hours, and Ada Marin sat in the 3rd gallery for all of it. And it was the ugliest and most necessary thing she had ever witnessed. The man from Ceres came. His name was Oral Caston, and he was not a monster either, which was the worst part. He was a shipwright, and he had a good face, and he had lost a sister-in-law and 2 nephews on Long Reach, and he stood in the well of the assembly and made the case for reciprocity in a voice that shook, and he made it well. He said that the galaxy had watched. He said that 900 worlds had watched 10 million human beings be killed under color of law and had done nothing, and that every one of those worlds had come away from their screens with a single new piece of knowledge, which was that you could do that to humans and nothing would happen. He said that the only sentence the Imperium would ever understand was one written in the same language it had used. He said that mercy, offered to a power that had just proven what it was not mercy, it was an invitation, and that the next colony to burn would burn because of the words spoken in this room today. Half the assembly was on its feet when he finished. Ada was gripping the rail so hard her fingers hurt, and there was a voice inside her, a real voice her own, saying yes, saying do it, saying Kel Atoll for Tessu Prime and let the galaxy count. Then Halima Osai took the floor, and she let the noise run for a long time, and when it had finally guttered out, she did not raise her voice at all. Mr. Caston is right about the galaxy, she said. He is right that 900 worlds watched and learned something, and he is right that what they learned will get more of us killed unless it is unlearned. Everything he said about the danger is true. I want that in the record. I am not going to stand here and pretend that the man who disagrees with me is a fool, because he isn't, and because we are about to do something very difficult, and we will not do it by lying about how tempting the easy thing is. She turned to face the well. So let us be precise about what he proposes. He proposes that we find a world of the Ossaran Imperium with 10 million people on it, and that we do to those people what was done to ours. Let us not use the word reciprocity, which is a word for accountants. Let us describe the act. Somewhere on that world there is a woman who has never heard of Hesperine, because the Imperium's domestic feed did not carry the 6 days, because empires do not show their own citizens the bill. She has a son, the son is 4, the son has done nothing. Mr. Caston proposes that we kill him, deliberately, with our eyes open, and that we do it because of the arithmetic, and I want everyone in this chamber to understand that this is what is on the table, because if we vote for it, we are going to vote for it having said it out loud. The chamber was absolutely silent. Now, Osai said, here is why I will not do it, and it is not because I am gentle. I am not gentle. I have signed death warrants. It is because I have read the Ossaran judgment, all 900 pages, and I know what it is. She held up a slate. It is a machine for the manufacture of innocence. That is its function. Every step of it exists to ensure that when the deed is done, no living Ossaran is responsible for it. The court is not responsible. It applied the statute. The statute is not responsible. It is 11,000 years old. The marshal is not responsible. He executed a warrant. The gunner is not responsible. He obeyed the marshal. The assembly of the Imperium is not responsible. It merely voted the writ, as it votes 400 writs a year and no one reads them. The radiance is not responsible. The radiance is a symbol, and symbols do not sign things. 10 million dead, and if you walk that chain from end to end, you will not find one hand on the knife. That is not a failure of their system. That is their system working. That is what 22,000 years of law without conscience produces, a perfect, seamless, gleaming absence of anybody at all. She let the slate drop. And Mr. Caston proposes that we answer it by killing 10 million people who had nothing to do with it. Do you see? Do you see what that is? It is the same machine. It is the identical machine. We would be saying, these people are not people, they are a quantity, and the quantity is owed. We would be building with our own hands the exact device that killed our children, and we would be pointing it the other way and calling that justice. And in 1,000 years there would be 2 atrocities and a long grievance and no guilty man on either side. And some historian would write that it was tragic on both sides. And Talia Marin, teacher, of Kel Atoll, would be a rounding error in a paragraph about the cycle of violence. Ada Marin in the 3rd gallery put her hand over her mouth. I will not give them that, Osai said. I will not let them make us into the second half of their sentence. They wrote a judgment with no defendant in it. Very well, we will write one with defendants in it, all of them, by name. And then she laid it out, and it was so simple that Ada heard the assembly stop breathing. The Commonwealth would not declare war on the Ossaran Imperium. War was a status. War was a fog. War was the thing you did to a nation, and nations, as everyone had just been reminded, cannot be guilty. Instead, the Court of Fleet Inquiry, sitting under the Commonwealth's own law and under conquered Article 14, which permitted any member to seek the persons of those who had committed crimes against its nationals, would issue warrants, not against the Imperium. Against people, against Grand Marshal Rithai's call, against every flag officer of the Ninth Punitive Armada, against every commanding officer of every vessel that had participated, against the 11 justices of the Court of the Radiant Throne who had signed the finding, against the 406 members of the Imperial Assembly who had voted the writ, by name, with their voting records attached, against the Radiant's Tesuvai, personally in her own body, as the sovereign whose seal had made the warrant lawful. Warrants, ordinary warrants of the kind a constable serves at a door, 10,000 of them. And the Fifth Fleet would go and serve them. They will resist, Osai said. Of course they will resist. And when a warrant is resisted, the officer serving it may use such force as is necessary and no more, and every use of that force is itself a matter for the record and may itself be examined. That is not a weakness of the instrument. That is the instrument. We are not going to the Vail Reach to punish the Ossarai. We are going there to arrest 10,000 named individuals and bring them before a court in open session, with counsel, with a right of answer, with the burden on us. And if we cannot prove it against a man, that man walks out of the door a free citizen of the Imperium with an apology and a berth home. Somebody in the well shouted that it was insane. Somebody else shouted that it was cowardice. It is neither, Osai said. It is the most frightening thing anyone has ever proposed to do to that empire, and if you do not understand why, then you have not understood what they are. They are not afraid of fire. They have been on fire before. They are 22,000 years old. They have burned and rebuilt 9 times. They have a word for it. They are afraid of one thing only. They are afraid of a proceeding they do not control. Because for 11,000 years, the Radiant Throne's answer to every question has been that the law is theirs, and if we go there and prove, in the open, on their own feed, with their own citizens watching, that a thing can be lawful and monstrous at the same time, and that we can tell the difference and they cannot, then we will have done something to them that no fleet in history has done. We will have taken their law away from them and given it back with a conscience in it, and they will never be the same, and neither will anyone who watched. She sat down. The Commonwealth Assembly voted at 4 in the morning, Callisto time. The instrument of compulsion passed by 31 votes. Oral Caston voted for it. Ada watched him do it. He stood up in the well afterward with his good shaking face, and he said one sentence into the record, and Ada wrote it down in her own hand later, although she was not on duty, and no one had asked her to. He said, "If you don't get every one of them, I will spend the rest of my life telling this assembly it was wrong, and I will be right." It took 8 months. That was the part the galaxy never understood afterward. Everyone remembered the Reach. Nobody remembered the 8 months, and the 8 months were where it was won. The Commonwealth built, not a battle fleet. There was no time and no money to build a fleet that could fight 900 worlds, and Quan told the assembly so in terms that ended 2 careers. What she built instead was an instrument for arresting a fleet. 12 monitors, slow and enormously armored, built around a single system the engineers called the Anchor, a device that could hold a volume of space in a state where nothing inside it could enter jump. It did not shoot. It did not need to. It meant that once the Fifth Fleet arrived, nothing left. Not a battleship, not a courier, not a lifeboat. Nobody ran. She built 400 boarding cutters and trained 9,000 Marines to take a ship without breaking it. and she made them do it, over and over in mock-ups, against human crews playing Ossaran, until the average boarding took 11 minutes and the average boarding produced 0 dead on either side. And when a training squad blew a bulkhead they hadn't needed to blow, she made the whole battalion sit in a room and watch the footage and explain, one at a time, what they would say about it under oath. And she built a court. That was Ossai's contribution, and it was the strangest ship's fitting in naval history. A full court of fleet inquiry, in the belly of the flagship, with a bench and a well and a dock and a gallery and cells for 200 and a brig hold for 8,000 more, and translation banks in 9 languages, and a hardened relay array that could push an uncut feed to every world in the Conquered in real time, and a records annex. The records annex needed a recorder. Vandra was too old for the acceleration. He told Ada that in his office in the last week, with the muster lists on his desk. "I'm putting your name in," he said. "You'll be recorder of the court, not junior, recorder. Every word that court says in your hand under your signature." Ada stared at him. "Sir, I've been in the service 4 months. 12, he said, "by the time we sail, and that's not why you're going." He took his glasses off and polished them, which was what he did instead of feeling things where people could see. "Ossai asked for you. I said no. I said it was cruel, and I said it was bad law, and I said any advocate in the galaxy would move to strike a transcript kept by a woman whose family were the dead. And she said," he stopped. "What did she say?" "She said, Emil, when this is over, that court is going to read 10 million names into the record. Who do you want holding the pen? A stranger." He put his glasses back on. "And I couldn't answer her, so you're going. And Marin, you're going to hear things in that room that you will not be able to unhear. Men explaining why it wasn't them. That's what you'll do for a year. You'll sit 10 feet from the man who did it and you will write down his excuses exactly without one word of your own in them, and you will not be allowed to say anything back. Ever. Do you understand what I'm asking you to survive?" Ada Marin thought about a key in the rain, and a woman who had a rule about crying, and a boy who had told a long story about a pump. "Yes, sir," she said, "that's the job." The 5th Fleet came out of jump at the edge of the Vail Reach on the 11th of March, and did nothing at all for 6 hours. That was the first thing that frightened them. The Ninth Punitive Armada was moored at Vail Station, 340 warships in parade ranks, because it had come home to a triumph. There had been ceremonies. There had been a procession on Tessu Prime with the Radiants in an open car. The Armada was at anchor with half its crews on leave and its magazines 2/3 struck down for the refit cycle, and when the human fleet arrived, every officer in that system expected the same thing, because it was the thing that had happened for 11,000 years. An aggrieved power arrives, shoots, is beaten, and negotiates. Instead, 61 human warships and 12 enormous armored cylinders took up station at 4 light minutes and stopped. And then they began to broadcast. Not a demand, not a threat. Ada Marin, sitting at the recorder's desk in the well of the court on the flagship, with her stylus in her hand, wrote it down as it went out, because Ossai had ruled that service of process was a proceeding of the court and would be recorded. The broadcast was a warrant, 10,000 of them actually, transmitted in sequence, unencrypted in Old High Ossaran and Trade Ossaran and the 9 conquered languages, on every channel including the Imperium's own domestic feed, which the relay array on the flagship had spent 8 months learning how to reach. Each one said the same thing. It named a person. It stated the charge. It stated the evidence relied upon in summary, with a citation to the Imperium's own broadcast record, because the Imperium had helpfully filmed the entire thing itself. It stated the court, the date of the sitting and the person's rights, to counsel of their choosing at Commonwealth expense, to answer, to call witnesses, to remain silent without inference, to appeal. It stated that they were required to surrender themselves. And it stated, in a clause that Advocate General Roop had rewritten 40 times, that any officer who surrendered their vessel would be received as a prisoner under the Concord Convention, that their crew would be disembarked, fed, treated, and repatriated at the conclusion of proceedings, and that no crew member below the rank of vessel commander was named in any warrant at all. That last clause was the one that broke them in the end, not immediately, later. Then the fleet broadcast the schedule, 12 hours to comply, then the terms would be repeated, then 12 hours more. And then Admiral Teodora Reisquan put her boots up and waited. "They think we're bluffing," said Roop, watching the plot. "They think we're stupid," Reisquan said. "It's not the same thing, and it's better." Vail Station's answer came in the 8th hour. It was a formal note, courteous, exquisitely drafted, and it ran to 60 pages. It observed that the Commonwealth's warrants proceeded from a court with no jurisdiction over Imperial subjects. It observed that Article 9 forbade interference in internal legal proceedings. It observed that the acts complained of were the acts of a sovereign, and that a sovereign's acts are not crimes, by definition, since a crime is a breach of law and the sovereign is the source of law. It invited the Commonwealth to submit a claim for indemnity through the Concord Standing Committee on Property, and it suggested a figure. Halima Osai read it in the well of her own court, in open session on the open feed, with Ada writing. "The note is received and filed," Osai said. "The court makes no ruling upon it because the court is not asked to. A defendant who declines to appear does not thereby abolish the court. The warrants stand. Service continues." At the 24th hour, the Armada began to get under way, and Ada Marin learned what her species had spent 8 months building. It was not a battle. Ada, who had never seen one, kept waiting for it to become a battle, and it never did. It was more like watching someone take a watch apart. The 12 monitors went in first and simply sat there, and the anchor came up, a field nobody could see and nobody could feel, and from that moment nothing in the Vail Reach could jump. 3 Ossaran couriers tried it, and Ada watched their drives flare and gutter and flare and gutter, over and over, like men trying to start a wet engine. And then they stopped trying and turned and ran for the system's edge on thrusters, which meant 9 days of running, and the humans let them go, and 9 days later they were still running, and they surrendered because they had nowhere on Earth to be. Nothing escaped, that was the whole of it. There was no clever ambush and no wonder weapon. There was a field that meant that every decision made in that system had to be lived with by everyone in that system. The Ossarai had never fought like that. Nobody had. In 22,000 years of Imperial warfare, every battle had been a thing you could leave. The Armada came out in 3 squadrons and the human line did not close. It backed away, keeping range, and it kept broadcasting the terms, and Ada, at her desk, kept writing them down, and the 11th repetition went out while the first Ossaran salvos were already in flight. Then Reisquan began to shoot, and every shot the 5th Fleet fired that day went into an engine or a gun. That was the doctrine, and it had cost 8 months to build. Human gunnery did not shoot at ships. It shot at capability. The monitors could not be hurt by anything the Armada had left after the refit strikedown, and behind them the human cruisers worked with an unhurried, awful patience, taking a battleship's drives off, then her main batteries, then her secondaries, then her sensor towers, and then going quiet and repeating the terms in clear on that ship's own bridge channel by name, to that ship's commander by name. Shiplord Vesek Torin of the Imperial vessel Ninefold Radiance, you are named in Warrant 4112. Your drives are gone. Your batteries are gone. There is no relief coming. Nothing in this system can jump. You are required to surrender your vessel. Your crew are not charged. Strike your colors and they will all go home. This is the 3rd time of asking. There will be a 4th. There was always a 4th. Reisquan made it a standing order and enforced it with a savagery that surprised people who had misread her. In the 4th hour of the action, A human captain destroyed a crippled Ossaran destroyer 11 seconds after its final refusal, which was lawful and correct and within the rules of engagement, and Razquan relieved him on the spot, in front of his own bridge crew, and put his executive officer in the chair. "The order says 4 askings," she said, over the fleet channel to everyone. "It does not say 4 askings unless you are busy." 310 people were aboard that ship, Captain, and 11 seconds is not long enough for a frightened man to change his mind, and changing his mind was the entire point of the exercise. You will be tried, not for the destroyer, for the 11 seconds. They boarded 91 ships that day. That was the number the galaxy could not get over afterward. The Ninth Punitive Armada had 340 vessels in the Vail Reach, and the Fifth Fleet destroyed 209 of them, and boarded and took 91, and 40 more struck their colors in the following 6 days without a shot, and 11,460 Ossaran spacers walked off those decks alive, and were fed and were housed and were counted and were sent home. The boarding parties went in with the Marines Razquan had trained for 8 months, and they did it the way they had rehearsed it, and the rehearsals had been about one thing. An Ossaran crew who has struck colors is a crew of people who are not charged with anything and are going home. Ada read the after-action transcripts. There is a recording, still played in war colleges, of a Marine sergeant named Idris Ape standing in the wrecked mess deck of the Ossaran cruiser Vail Ascendant with 200 gray terrified spacers packed against the far bulkhead. And Ape has his rifle slung, and he is holding up a slate with the warrant list on it. And he is saying in bad phonetic trade Ossaran over and over, "Is your name on this? No. Then you are going home. Is your name on this? No. Then you are going home." 2 of them were on the list. Both were officers. Both were taken. The other 198 sat down on the deck of their own wrecked mess, and some of them wept, and a 19-year-old Ossaran rating asked Sergeant Ape if it was true that the humans ate prisoners, because that was what the political officer had told them, and Ape, who had lost a cousin on Windward 9, said no, and gave the boy his ration bar, and that clip ran on the Imperium's domestic feed for a year because the humans put it there, and the Imperium could not take it down. The cost was not free. Ada wrote down the cost too, because that was also the record. On the second day, the Armada's flagship broke for Tessu Prime, and Grand Marshal Rithai's call did a thing that Ada Marin would spend the following year listening to men explain. He put his surviving heavy squadron into the orbital lanes of Tessu Prime and moored it, deliberately, in among the civil traffic, the habitat rings, the transfer stations, the grain lighters, the 11-kilometer hospital arcology called the Mercy of the Throne with 40,000 patients in it. He interlaced his warships with the lives of his own citizens, and then he opened a channel and told the humans to come and get him. Razquan looked at the plot for a long time. "Signal," she said, "in clear, to the Marshal and to every civil traffic controller on that planet and to the domestic feed. Tell them what he's done. Tell them we can see it. Tell them we will not fire into that volume." "Ma'am," said her flag captain, "if we don't fire into that volume, we have to go in and take those ships by boarding at pistol range, and that's, Admiral, that's 4,000 casualties. Ours. Minimum. I know what it is. We can hold the anchor and starve him out. 6 weeks and he's got no air." "So has the hospital," Razquan said. "So have the grain lighters. 6 weeks of siege on a populated orbital and we will kill more civilians with patience than we would with guns, and it will be slower and everyone will watch." "No," she stood up. "He has bet everything he has on one proposition. The proposition is that we are what he is. He thinks we will either fire into that volume, which makes us him and ends the trial before it starts, or we will flinch, which proves the whole thing was theater. He does not have a third answer, because in 22,000 years nobody has ever shown him one." She turned to the flag captain. "Boarding action. All squadrons. No main battery discharge inside the orbital envelope, and I mean none, and any officer who fires one will answer for it in that court downstairs, whatever the reason. We go in with cutters and marines, and we take those ships one compartment at a time, and we pay for it. Tell the fleet why. Tell them exactly why. They're allowed to know what they're dying for. Ada was in the court well when the casualty lists began to come in, because the court had no session that day and the recorder's desk had a repeater on it. And she watched the numbers climb, and she understood, in a way she had not understood in the assembly gallery, that Justice Osai's beautiful argument had a price, and that the price was being paid in the next room by people her own age. 3,811 humans died taking the Marshall Squadron out of the orbital lanes of Tessu Prime, in 11 days, at pistol range, in the dark, in ships they had been ordered not to shoot. 9 million Ossaran civilians on the habitat rings and in the grain lighters, and in the hospital arcology called the Mercy of the Throne watched them do it, out of their own windows live, for 11 days. There is no propaganda in the galaxy that could have survived that. The Imperium tried. The Imperium's feed explained that the humans were being cautious for tactical reasons, and 40,000 patients in the Mercy of the Throne looked out of the ward ports at human cutters going in against gun batteries 300 meters from their beds, taking losses that any fool could see were unnecessary, and drew their own conclusions. On the 11th day, a woman named Vesa Oru, a shift supervisor on a grain lighter, 44 years old, no politics, 3 children, cut her lighter's engines in the middle of the lane and refused to move it out of the human boarding corridor until the humans agreed to take her aboard so she could tell them where the Marshal's squadron had put its ammunition tenders. Ada wrote her statement down later in the court. It is 9 words long in the record before the questions start. You did not fire at us, so I am helping. The Ninth Punitive Armada ceased to exist as a fighting force at 11:40 in the morning, local time, on the 27th of March, when the last vessel under Grand Marshal Rithai's call's flag struck its colors. Ada noticed the time, and it took her a moment to understand why it made her hands shake, and then she remembered that the sentence at Hesperine had begun at 11:40 in the morning, and she sat very still and did not write that down, because it was not evidence, it was only a coincidence, and coincidences do not go in the ledger. A staff lieutenant came into the court well an hour later with the tally, breathless, 22 years old, and he said it the way everyone said it that week, because it was true, and because it was the shape the whole thing had made in his mouth. "Ma'am," he said to Osai, "the Armada's gone, 340 ships. There are no survivors." Halima Osai looked up slowly. "Recorder," she said, "do not enter that." "No, ma'am," Ada said. "Lieutenant," Osai took off her glasses. "Sit down. You are going to hear that sentence a great deal in the next 50 years, and I want you to be the last human being who says it wrong, so listen. The Ninth Punitive Armada has no survivors. That is correct. The Armada was a fighting force, and that fighting force is gone. It will not be reconstituted. There is no ship of it in the order of battle of any power, and the 92 officers named in the warrants are, every one of them, in the hold of this vessel or dead in the wreck of their own ships with the warrant unserved. Not one got out. That is what no survivors means, and it is the truest thing anyone will say this year." She put her glasses back on. "But 11,460 Ossaran spacers are alive on this ship's brig deck, being fed, and they will be home by autumn. 98 of them are in our sick bay, and 4 of them are being operated on by our surgeons right now, ahead of 2 of ours on triage, because that is the rule. 9 million people are alive on the rings above Tessu Prime who would not be if we had done the easy thing, and 3,811 of ours are dead for it, and their names are the price of that sentence, and I will not have it said carelessly in my court." "Yes, ma'am," the lieutenant said. "The Armada did not survive," Osai said. "The Ossarai did. Say it that way. Say it that way for the rest of your life, And when your grandchildren ask you what humans did at the Vail Reach, that is the sentence that will save them. The Court of Fleet Inquiry sat for 411 days. It sat in the belly of a warship in orbit of an enemy capital which had never happened, and it sat on an open feed, uncut, unedited, with a 9-second delay for nothing but translation, which had also never happened. Every world in the Conquered could watch it. Every world did. On Tessu Prime, the domestic feed carried it because the domestic feed could not stop carrying it. The humans were pushing it into the planet's own civil relay from 400 kilometers up, and the only way to black it out was to black out weather and traffic, and the emergency channels too. And the Imperial Assembly, after 11 days of argument, decided it could not. So the Ossaran watched. 900 worlds of them in their homes watched their own Grand Marshal answer questions. Ada Marin sat at the recorder's desk, which was a low bench directly below the bench of the court, 10 feet from the dock, and wrote it all down. She had thought the hard part would be the first day. It was not. The first day was procedure. The hard part came in the 11th week, and it did not come from the marshal. The defense was ready. Of course it was. The Imperium had 11,000 years of advocates, and it sent its best, a Ossaran Silk named Advocate Neth Ossavar, who had appeared before the Radiant Throne 400 times and who took the brief, and who did his job with a competence Ada came to hate and then slowly to respect. Ossaran had insisted. Council of their choosing at Commonwealth expense. Ossavar was paid out of the Commonwealth treasury to demolish the Commonwealth's case, and he tried, and it was the most important thing anyone did in that room. His defense was not a lie. That was what made it terrible. His defense was the truth, laid out with total honesty, and it was this. Nobody did it. He called the gunnery officers first, the ones the Commonwealth had not charged, as his own witnesses, and he walked them through it. Sub-Lieutenant Kes Vaineth, 26 years old, had been at a console. He had received a target designation. He had confirmed it against his board. He had pressed what he was told to press. He had not known what was under the designation. Nobody at his station could see a planet, they saw a plot. Was he guilty? The Commonwealth had not charged him, and Ossavar made sure the court noticed that. Then his commander, who had passed the designation from the squadron plan. Then the squadron flag captain, who had received the plan from the Armada staff. Then the staff officer who had drafted it from a warrant. Then the marshal, who had held the warrant. And there, Ossavar said, turning to the bench, is where my learned friend's chain arrives, and there is where it must stop, because the marshal did not write the warrant. The marshal received it, sealed, from the court of the Radiant Throne under the hand of 11 justices, pursuant to a statute of the 11th book, ratified by a writ of the Imperial Assembly, sealed by the Radiance herself. A warrant, my lords, a lawful order in perfect form. My client is a naval officer of 40 years' service. He is not a magistrate. It is not his office to look behind a sealed warrant of his own sovereign court and ask whether it is wicked. If it were, then no order in any navy in this galaxy, including my learned friends, would ever be worth the paper, because every lieutenant would be a judge. He let that sit. The Commonwealth's whole case, Ossavar said, requires this court to find that a man in uniform is obliged to disobey a lawful order of his lawful sovereign because he privately concludes it is monstrous. I invite the court to imagine what my learned friend would say if an Ossaran officer applied that rule to an order of the Commonwealth's. My client did not choose. He was given no choice. That is not a defense I am proud of. It is simply what happened. Ada wrote it down. Every word exactly, without one word of her own in it. Her hand did not shake. She was rather proud of that afterward, and rather ashamed of being proud. And the thing she had to sit with for 11 weeks, Ossavar was right about the machine. He had described it perfectly. Justice Ossaran had described the same machine in the assembly and had called it a device for the manufacture of innocence. And here it was, working in open court. And it was working on Ada. because at 4 in the morning in her cabin she found she could not honestly say what a 26-year-old at a console with a plot and a designation should have done. The marshal himself gave evidence in the 16th week. Rethai's call was very tall and very old, and he answered every question, and he never once lied, and Ada found that she had expected a monster and had got a competent man. He agreed the Armada had done it. He agreed he had commanded. He agreed he had not asked what was under the designation, because it was not his office to ask, and because he had been given a warrant, and a warrant is not a suggestion. Asked whether he had thought about the 10 million, he was silent for 11 seconds. Ada timed it, because timing silences was her job, and then said, "I thought about the warrant." Advocate General Roop asked him, "Did it occur to you to refuse?" "No," said Rethai's call. "Why not?" "Because it was lawful," the marshal said, "and I am not a private person. If I had refused, I would have been relieved within the hour, and another officer would have executed it before the day was out, and I would have accomplished nothing except my own comfort. I would have felt clean. 10 million would still be dead. You are asking me to say I should have purchased my conscience with a gesture. I decline. I am not going to tell this court that I would have been braver, because it would not be true and because it would not have mattered." Roop said, "Would it not?" "No," said the marshal, "it would not." And Roop said, "Call Shiplord Ven Sewell." Ada Marin had prepared the witness list. She had known the name was on it. She had not known what it was for, because Roop had kept that in his own head for 11 months, and she wrote the next 40 minutes down with her ears ringing. Ven Sewell was 51 and had been an Ossaran shiplord of the Ninth Punitive Armada, commanding the heavy cruiser Ossavar's Grace, and on the 6th day at Hesperine, he had read the designation on his board and had done arithmetic, because he had been at the Reach for 9 years, and he knew what a plot of that size and that shape meant, and he had understood what he was being told to do. And he had said no. He had said it on an open bridge channel in front of 40 crew at 11:38 in the morning, 2 minutes before 11:40. He had said, "Ossavar's Grace declines the designation. Refer to the marshal." And then he had ordered his batteries safed and had sat there and had watched. He was relieved in 4 minutes. He was arrested in 9. He was court-martialed by the Imperium in 11 days, convicted of contumacy in the face of the enemy, stripped, and sentenced to life at the labor station on Kevin Deep, where the humans had found him in the 11th month of the inquiry, alive, because the Imperium did not execute, the Imperium filed. He stood in the well of the human court in a borrowed gray coat, and Roop asked him 5 questions. "Shiplord, were you given the same warrant as the Grand Marshal?" "The same, sealed, under the Justice's hands." "Was it lawful in its form?" "Perfectly." "Were you told you had no choice?" "I was told it by my flag captain, my political officer, and my own executive in that order in about 90 seconds. They were sincere. They believed it." "Shiplord," Roop said, "did you have a choice?" And Ven Sewell looked, not at Roop and not at the bench, but across the well at Rethai's call in the dock, and he said, "I am here." The 9-second delay ran. Ada Marin wrote 3 words, and the sound in the gallery was like the sea. "I had a choice," Ven Sewell said. "I know I had a choice because I made it, and I am standing in this room, and nothing that the marshal has told you is a thing I did not also believe. I believed I would be relieved. I was relieved. I believed another ship would fire in my place. Another ship fired in my place. Every word of his arithmetic is correct." He turned back to Roop. "It changed nothing. 10 million are dead, and my refusal saved not one of them, and I have had 9 years in a hole to think about that. And I would do it again tomorrow, and I want this court to understand why, because it is not a noble reason." "Tell the court." "Because the arithmetic is a trick," Ven Sewell said. "It is a trick we do to ourselves. If it does not matter whether I refuse, then it does not matter whether any of us refuse, and if none of us refuse, then the order goes, and the order goes precisely because each of us has calculated that his own refusal is meaningless. The Marshal says his refusal would have accomplished nothing. He is right. And every officer in that armada was right, and there were 9,000 of them, and every single one of them was right, and 10 million people are dead of 9,000 men being right. He was shaking. The order needs all of us. That is the secret. It is not strong. It is a rumor that we agree to. And when it turns out that the whole chain of your civilization is nothing but 10,000 men each individually excused, then there is only one place left where the thing can be stopped, and it is not in the statute, and it is not in the court, and it is not in the throne. It is in the chair you are sitting in when the designation comes up on your board. It is only ever there. It has never been anywhere else. Ossaran rose to cross-examine. He stood for a long time. Ada, 10 feet away, watched an advocate of 400 appearances look at his own brief and find nothing in it. He asked one question. It was, Roop said afterward, the bravest thing done in that room by anybody. Shiplord, said Advocate Neth Ossaran, was my client in your judgment a wicked man? No, said Vensul. He was an obedient one. I am going to spend the rest of my life explaining to our children that those are not different. Ossaran sat down. The defense of no choice was over. It did not survive the 11th month, and it has never been raised successfully in any court in the Conquered since, and it is cited now in 900 worlds as Sewell's answer, and Ada Marin's transcript is the text. But the day the galaxy actually remembers is the day the court tried a human. It came in the 22nd week, and it was on the docket like any other matter, and the Commonwealth had known it was coming since the second day at Vail Station. In the matter of Commander Yusuf Bakir, of the Terran Commonwealth ship Windward. Bakir was 31. He had lost his brother on Faro Deep. On the fourth day of the action, he had brought Windward alongside the crippled Ossaran cruiser Vail Ascendant, which had struck its colors 11 minutes before, and one of the Ascendant's dorsal mounts, a runaway servo, they established later on a dead ring, with nobody in it, had traversed toward him. And Bakir had fired, and had kept firing for 9 seconds, and 406 Ossaran spacers who had surrendered died in their own hangar bays. He was charged with unlawful killing, not by the Ossaran, by his own service in his own court on the same feed, in the same well, in front of the same galaxy. Reyes Quan gave evidence for the prosecution. That was the part the Ossaran could not process at all. The admiral of the fleet, standing to say that her own officer had done murder. Ada watched Ossaran faces in the gallery and understood that she was watching something in them come apart slowly and not unkindly. Bakir did not run from it. He stood in the same dock the Marshal had stood in, and he said yes, he had fired, and no, he had not been in danger he could not have avoided, and yes, he had had 11 minutes' notice that the ship had struck, and no, he did not offer his brother as a reason, and the court could ask him why he had fired and he would tell them the truth, which was that he had wanted to. I want to say it plainly, Bakir said, because there's a young Ossaran officer watching this who is going to be in my chair one day. I did not fire because I was afraid. I fired because for 9 seconds I was glad to. That is the whole of it. That is what I did at Faro Deep, and there is nothing under it. Don't let anybody dress it up for me. They convicted him in 4 days. Osai sentenced him to be dismissed the service with ignominy and to 11 years confinement, and she said, in passing sentence, the sentence that is on the wall of the judiciary at Callisto now, in her own words from Ada Marin's transcript. Commander Bakir, this court does not punish you because you are worse than the men in the other dock. It punishes you because you are not. That is the only claim we have ever made, and it is the only one that is worth anything. Not that we are good, but that we are answerable. You have made that claim true today at a cost to yourself which this court sees and does not diminish. Take him down. Bakir's name went into the ledger, in Ada Marin's hand, on the same page as the others in the same ink, and Ada wrote it without any hesitation at all, and then went back to her cabin and was sick. The warrants that could not be served by boarding cutter were served by the Ossaran themselves. Nobody had planned that. Raisquan had no intention of putting a Marine on Tessu Prime. She said so on the feed in clear in the second month, and repeated it every month after, because Osai had insisted that the one promise the Commonwealth must never be caught breaking was the promise not to descend. The Fifth Fleet held orbit and held the anchor and did not land. It had come for a fleet and a chain of command, and the chain of command that was on the ground was, Osai ruled, beyond the court's reach unless it walked to her. It walked to her. The 11 justices of the Court of the Radiant Throne came first, in the 14th month, and they did not come willingly. They were put aboard a shuttle by the Imperial Assembly at 4 in the morning, without ceremony, because the Assembly had 406 warrants of its own outstanding, and had worked out the arithmetic. Ossaran told the court dryly that his instructions on that point had been very clear and very short. Then the Assembly discovered that the arithmetic did not work, because Advocate General Roop stood up the same afternoon and said that the Commonwealth would not be trading. The warrants were not a bargaining position. They were warrants. There was nothing to buy. And then the 11 days above Tessu Prime, and the woman in the grain lighter, and 411 days of open feed, did what no fleet could have done. The Ossaran had watched their own Grand Marshal say I thought about the warrant. They had watched Ven Sul, whom their own state had buried in a hole for 9 years, stand in a borrowed coat and say I am here. They had watched a human admiral testify against her own officer, and a human court take him down for 406 Ossaran dead, and they had done the sum that everybody on 900 worlds was doing by then, which was, the aliens hanged one of their own for 400 of ours, and nobody has ever hanged anybody for 10 million of theirs, and we did that, and it was lawful, and it was us. The strikes began on the ring cities, then the shipyards, then, unbelievably, the Registry of Statutes, where 11,000 clerks walked out and stood in the square in front of 40 million carved cases and would not go back in. There was no violence. The Ossaran did not do violence. The Ossaran did paperwork, and what they did was worse. 406 members of the Imperial Assembly found that no clerk in the capital would file anything they signed. The Assembly dissolved itself in the 16th month, and 190 of its members surrendered to the Fifth Fleet within the following 6 weeks. The rest were taken up by the Imperium's own new provisional magistracy and tried on Tessu Prime in Ossaran courts, under Ossaran law and Osai, to the fury of half the Commonwealth press, withdrew the human warrants against every one of them the same day, and said in open session that a court which insists on trying a man twice is not a court. It is a habit, and that the Imperium's competence to judge its own was the entire object of the exercise, and she was not going to sabotage it in the last mile for the pleasure of being the one holding the gavel. The Radiant's Tesuvai came aboard on the 11th of December in the 17th month, alone, in a plain coat, on a shuttle she had signaled ahead herself. Ada Marin wrote the whole arraignment. It is 4 pages. The sovereign of 900 worlds gave her name, and her age, which was 309, and confirmed that she understood the charges, and was asked how she pleaded and said, "My seal is on the warrant. I did not read it. There were 400 that month. That is my answer, and it is also my crime, and I will not have counsel say it prettier than that." Ossaran, who had been ready to argue sovereign immunity for a month, closed his brief. "The throne has been a symbol for 11,000 years, Tesuvai said. That was the arrangement. A symbol seals, a symbol does not read. A symbol is not answerable because a symbol has no hands. It was very comfortable. I was very comfortable." She looked at the gallery and at the feed and at 900 worlds. 10 million people are dead because my civilization built a chain in which every link was a symbol to the link above it and an order to the link below it, and I sat at the top of it holding a stamp, and when it was done, There was nobody in the whole of my empire who had done it. That is not an accident of our law. It is the finest thing our law ever made. I am here to break it, and the only way I know how is to be the first radiance in 11,000 years to stand in a dock and be a person. The Court of Fleet Inquiry delivered judgment on the 411th day. It ran to 11,000 pages, and Ada Marin had written every word of the underlying transcript, and she was 25 years old, and she sat at her desk below the bench with her hands folded while Halima Osai read the summary. 92 officers of the Ninth Punitive Armada convicted, 9 acquitted 9, and Osai read their names first deliberately and directed that they leave the ship as free citizens of the Imperium with the court's apology and passage home, and one of them, a supply commander named Retaliation, wept in the dock, and Ossavar had to help him out. The 11 justices of the Radiant Throne convicted, 190 members of the Assembly convicted, 4 acquitted. The Radiant's Tesuvai convicted on her plea, and no one was sentenced to death. Osai had known that would be the hardest hour, and she did not dodge it. She spoke to the feed, and through the feed to Oral Caston, who was in the gallery in row 3, and who had come out on the courier at his own expense to watch. This court has been asked by many people in many languages why it does not hang them, Osai said. I will answer once. We could. It would be lawful. It would be, in the ordinary sense, deserved. I do not stand here and tell you that Rethai's call has a right to draw breath that he did not take from 10 million people, because he does not, and nothing I say diminishes what he did. But this court exists to establish one proposition, and the proposition is that the killing of a human being is not an administrative act. It is never an administrative act. It cannot be made into one by a warrant, a statute, a seal, a plot, a designation, or the age of an empire. That is the whole of our case. It is the only thing we came 400 light years to say. And if we say it and then hang them, we say it with an asterisk. We say, killing is not administrative except when the paperwork is ours. We say, the difference between us and them is that our warrant was real. And that is a difference, and it matters, and it is not enough. Because in 11,000 years the Ossarai never once issued a warrant they believed was false either. Every link in their chain was sincere. Sincerity is not the safeguard. Nothing is the safeguard except the refusal to let the machine finish. She looked down at the dock. Life confinement, every one of them. Not in a hole. Kevin Deep is closed by order of the Provisional Magistracy, and I have written to congratulate them. In an open facility, with light, with books, with visits, with medicine, and with news, and they will live a long time, because their people live 300 years and we will not shorten it by a day. They will be alive when their grandchildren ask them. That is the sentence, not the cell, the question. The court rose. 900 worlds sat in silence for 11 minutes on the feed, and nobody afterward could explain who had started it or why nobody spoke. There was one thing left, and it was the reason Emil Vandra had sent a girl from Kel Atoll 400 light years in a warship. The Ossaran judgment, 900 pages, scrupulous, learned, immaculate, had named nobody. It had named the defendant Hesperine, and the defendant Hesperine was 10 million people compressed into one word, and that was not carelessness. That was the trick, at the root of it, the first move of the whole machine, to make a number where the people had been. You cannot execute 10 million people. You can only execute a quantity. Every other lie in that document stood on the first one. So the last order of the Court of Fleet Inquiry, entered on the 411th day, was 3 lines long. It directed that the identities of the persons killed at Hesperine be read into the record of the court, individually in open session on the open feed, in the order in which the harbor masters of Hesperine had kept their rolls, which was by atoll and by birth, and that the reading continue, without abridgment, until it was complete. 10 million names. They calculated it would take 11 years, sitting 6 hours a day. It took 12. The reading began on a Tuesday, which was nobody's idea, and it began aboard the flagship and it finished on Callisto, and in between it moved to a chamber built for it on the Concord's own station, because the Concord Assembly, the same assembly that had passed a resolution of concern and then amended it, voted unanimously to house it, and every delegate who voted knew exactly what they were voting to remember. It was never once interrupted. That is in the record too. In 12 years, 6 hours a day, there was not 1 hour when nobody was reading, and it was carried live on the Imperial domestic feed for all 12 years, because after the 17th month there was a provisional magistracy on Tessu Prime that had been elected by people who had watched a hospital arcology not be fired upon, and one of the first things they did was make the carriage mandatory. They came and read. That was the thing nobody predicted. Ossavar came, the advocate who had been paid out of the human treasury to try to destroy the case, and asked leave, and Os granted it without a word, and he read for 4 hours badly in an accent that mangled the vowels of Pharaoh deep, and came back every year for the rest of his life. Ven Sul read. Vesa Oru, the grain lighter supervisor, read and brought her 3 children, and the eldest, who was 9, read 11 names in careful phonetic trade and then had to stop. Sergeant Idris Ape read. Oral Caston of Ceres read for 6 hours a day for a month and never gave an interview about it ever to anyone. Yusuf Bakir, released in his 11th year, asked for leave to read, and there was an argument about it that went to the full bench, and Os ruled that a man who has served his sentence has served it, and that the roll was not a privilege of the innocent. He read for the last 11 months of the 12 years. He never spoke about it either. And in a facility with light and books and news, 400 light-years away, Rethai's Kal listened to all of it. That was not a sentence. Nobody imposed it. The feed was simply on, and he was permitted to have news, and he was permitted to turn it off, and for 12 years he did not. He was 311 years old when it ended. He is alive. He has never given an account of what those 12 years were, and no one has been able to make him. Ada Marin was recorder for all 12 years, and read for 2,000 hours of them, and it was in her 4th year that the roll came around the long chain of the equatorial shoals and reached Kel Atoll. They had offered quietly to have someone else take that watch. She had thought about it for a while and had said no, and Halima Osai, who was very old by then and no longer sat, but who came, because she came every year, had not tried to talk her out of it. They read by birth, the way the harbor masters had kept it, and Kel Atoll's rolls started at the East Key and worked west, which meant the school before the water works, which meant her mother before her brother, which Ada had known for 4 years was going to be true. She was 29 years old. She had a stylus in her hand out of habit, though there was nothing to write. The reading was the record, and the recorder's own name was already at the foot of 11,000 pages that had put an empire in a dock, and had not needed to burn a single city to do it. She read the 11 names ahead of it. Then she looked down at the roll, at a line in a harbor master's ledger from a town on a sea that did not know anyone was there, and she did not cry, because there was a rule about that, and she read it the way she had read 2 million others, plainly and with love, and without one word of her own in it. Talia Marin, she said, 41, teacher of Kel Atoll. And then she read the next one.